Until a few years ago, my workload was such that I could get myself sufficiently ahead of schedule to make time to watch some GDQ runs either live or on YouTube archives. It isn't as easy to make spare time available now, but sadly I've become less inclined to watch any of the US or European speedrunning events, and it's a shame because their primary purpose, that is charity fundraising, shows just how generous the gaming community is. These events deserve to have the widest possible appeal, and that's the problem. I've been trying to think of the right word, the fairest word, to describe how these events come across, and anachronistic felt kind of harsh, but the more I struggle for the right word, the more I find myself heading back towards that one. To put it simply, in terms of game choices and especially overall presentation, these events seem to have found themselves stuck somewhere in the early 90s. Dimly lit halls devoid of any kind of gaming theme, or indeed any theme at all, and a glut of ancient games, just a very small handful of titles that show off what current technology has allowed developers to create. Now, some of this is understandable. Whatever the event, the organisers have to buy a fixed allocation of venue time and accommodation as in floor space. Both of these are finite and present their own limitations. Decking out a hall to make it obvious it's a gaming event is going to cost money, and there will be an instinctive need to cram the event with as many game runs as possible. Now, GDQ has only been running since 2010, and I have no doubt that even they have been staggered by the money raised, around $18 million so far. That's a tidy sum, and it will have been very tempting to take the "we're obviously doing it right" approach given that level of success. If it ain't broke, etc. And each run that gets archived to YouTube is garnering at least 10,000 views within a day, so why change anything? Well, here's the question. The first 3 years were modestly successful. In fact, it's only the last 4 years where the big money has come in. But when you look at the figures, you get the impression it's starting to reach a plateau stage, especially in the case of SGDQ. The 2013 event raised about $257,000. In 2015, it brought in $1,216,000, not far from an additional million. In 2017, it increased to around $1,792,000, around $500,000 more. Now, there has been a little acceleration to reach this year's total of $2,122,000. And of course, there is not an endless pot of money to be donated, but the organisers should be taking note and looking at ways to widen the appeal of these events to guarantee that more people will donate more money. And the easiest way? Just make it more interesting. A lecture hall with tiered seating will make attendees more visible and generally has better lighting. Hell, it can't be worse than what we see at the current events. At the back, have some merchant stands selling games, memorabilia, t-shirts and the like. The status of GDQ is now such that it would surely be easy to attract a sponsor to cover venue hire and other associated costs. I mean, what business wouldn't like to have their name linked to a hugely important charity event and to have their logo in the corner of every video stream? Now, perhaps this peripheral stuff isn't as important as I imagine, so what about content? What about the games? I think there is a real problem here, one that may become worse if something doesn't change. It's all about, well, not just appeal, but relevance. When you look through the schedule, there are a heck of a lot of very, very old games, side-scrollers, top-down stuff with graphics from long before the age of polygons. And there are very few that many would regard as true classics. They seem to be chosen because they can be whizzed through in about 30 minutes. So the end result? More games, more variety, sounds sensible. But is it? Quantity and quality are not the same. In fact, they're frequently opposites. For example, if I had a ticket to watch a football match of my choice, would I go to see the two Premier League leaders in a clash that will settle the championship title, or a place in the Champions League, or whatever? Or 18 teams from the Unibond League each having a 10-minute kick around between fag breaks or whatever? Now, I want to go and see the best. Yes, some of these retro games are classics, but the gaming industry is constantly moving forward. Most importantly, games are getting longer. GDQ can't ignore that trend indefinitely. Sooner or later, the games it currently allows will have faded from everyone's memory and will be of little or no interest to anyone other than devoted aficionados, and that is a niche. GDQ can't afford to stay in that or any niche if it wants to develop. You guys all know The Last of Us is, well, I'm always banging on about it, but it's just one example of many modern games that need to be embraced by GDQ, ESA and the like. And there are several reasons, all of them for the good of the gaming community. Very old games, even classics, can be hard to come by, as can be some of the early consoles to which many were restricted. Speedrunning invites healthy competition. We all like to imagine we can develop a better strat here and there, but that's no good if it's incredibly difficult to source the game or its platform, and new games don't have that problem. Over time, some of those who have watched, for example, The Last of Us, will find new time saves in places others hadn't thought of looking. That means more players will get involved. And new games are also there to be purchased in a way that's meaningful to the industry, to the developers. Many of those ancient game developers don't even exist now, and those which do are certainly not hoping for further sales of their one title from 1985. They've generally moved on to far bigger stuff, games which they actually would like you to buy. And another thing with modern games, particularly but not exclusively those of AAA developers, is that they are just beautiful to look at. Yeah, I know, it sounds like an irrelevance, but I would rather watch 5 hours of God of War than 1 hour of Donkey Kong clones, and I'm not even a big fan of God of War. It's not my kind of genre, but by God it looks amazing, and that does actually matter. Speedrunning events can draw in an audience of donors who aren't themselves gamers, provided they are watching something that's visually impressive, where there really is something to see. GDQ can, of course, hang on to the best of the retro games, but it must start to make room for the best of what's out there now. And that will necessarily entail allowing for the much longer runs these games require. But these modern masterpieces will attract big audiences because of how good they are to look at. A glance through the 2018 SGDQ schedule showed, as every speedrunning schedule generally does, a very large number of any percent runs. To me, and yes, it's a personal thing, it seemed excessive, and it's likely to have seemed excessive to the casual gamer. Runs which use glitches, especially out-of-bounds glitches, can only really appeal to the more hardcore gamer, and that again gives it a niche quality. Most of these glitches are extremely difficult to access and even harder to complete, often because of there being very few visual reference points in out-of-bounds areas. But I'm not alone in thinking that although they're clever, they're also outside the spirit of gameplay. I have much more appreciation for a player who has an effective and skillful strat for dealing with an area of combat or puzzle solving or whatever, than for one who essentially, shall we say, chickens out and skips that area altogether. And it's also a matter of immersion. Whether you like a game or not, if it's visually impressive, you eventually familiarise yourself with the environment, get an overall feel for what's going on. When you move out of bounds and see all of those scattered pieces of what have now become rather meaningless objects, a lot of that immersion evaporates. I think the majority of gamers would like to see the best strats for dealing with all sections of a game they may wish to take on themselves, because the majority also recognise that most of the out of bounds stuff is incredibly difficult to do. But you know, it's not really about the gamers. To my mind, it's about the viewer, the one who is watching the run and expecting to see a game played from start to finish. This may not apply to all that many people, but when I see that kind of glitch, I always find the word cheat moving a little way up its list of synonyms. but we should keep any percent runs, not least because they are an established category in the speedrunning community. All I'd say is they don't have universal appeal, so maybe we don't need quite so many of them. I do think we need more of the high quality modern games, especially those of a more cinematic style, which shows off the kind of realism which is now possible. Because as well as a charity event, the likes of GDQ can also be a showcase for the gaming industry, because the industry will benefit from it, might even be encouraged to become involved. I have to stress that I'm in no way critical of speedrunning events, just the opposite, they are fantastic things. I'm just concerned that they may not be making the most of every opportunity to raise even more money for charity, and part of that may be down to limiting their content to what will appeal to a comparatively small section of the gaming community, when by modernising and even glamorising these events, they could appeal even to those whose interest in gaming may be marginal. It might take some imaginative thinking to make it work, but it might just come down to fresh thinking. More importantly, it could be that GDQ hasn't yet realised how big it can be. It's only 8 years old, and maybe there's a feeling that the kind of potential which exists could be overambitious for such a young entity. I'd suggest that isn't something to fear. I would be more concerned that after just 8 years, the momentum is just slackening off a little. Hey look, any charity event raising $2 million over 5 days is an impressive achievement, let's not forget that. But do we want SGDQ to also raise $2 million in 2020 or in 2025? Now that these events are established, this is the time to use some creative, wide-ranging ideas. In terms of global status, these speedrunning charity showcases could and should be as attractive and compelling as any of the major gaming conferences. Developers should be there for the occasional interview. Why not have big-name voice actors appearing for some brief speed challenges, or just there on the couch? These may be crap suggestions in themselves, but they're only mentioned to illustrate that new approaches can be looked at. So, come on, charity speedrun organisers, it's time to don the thinking trousers and come up with some new strats. There are always better ways of doing things. That's Dino speaking his usual stuff. Thank you for watching. Click that like and blah 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 and sub and all that stuff. Right, I'm off. I need a drink. It's hot. Bye now.